The one that had red, I think, on it?
It's on, it works.
All right, good, perfect, brilliant.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Lung Cancer Living Room. Happy to have all of you here. Everyone in the room, those of us joining online, welcome, welcome. Tonight, I just found out is the opening of it's Warriors, like day one, right? Game one.
Is it really?
Game one.
Wow.
I can't believe Rick's sitting here. I mean, wow. But it doesn't start till 7:30, so I'm assuming everybody's just going to clear out as soon as the meeting's over. Thank you.
Take the dessert and run.
Right,
yeah.
right. Thank you all for being here. We're so excited tonight to have Dr. Jacob Sands from Dana-Farber. Some of you may remember Dr. Sands was here a couple of years ago speaking with us at the living room, so we're more than thrilled to have him back. He just flew, well, I just found out today he was actually in San Francisco. He was at UC Davis for a while, but he was in San Francisco this weekend with his fiance, flew home Sunday to Boston, and then flew back today to be here with all of us. So huge thank you to Dr. Sands. He's going to talk to us a little bit about, not a little bit, a lot of bit, about something we touch on at most living rooms, but we don't really, or haven't in a while, given a full living room meeting attention to. And I think it's one of the more important things that we need to talk about that directly relates to each and every person in the room in some form or fashion, right? So clinical trials, what they are, what the different types are, what the different phases are, why they're important, not just from a treatment standpoint, but what other types of studies and trials are available out there that you can participate in to help move the needle forward in this space. So we're super excited to have Jacob here with us tonight. We're going to start again with the around the room. I will remind everybody if your cell phones are with you to please silence them. It inevitably happens. Not really so much here, but at pretty much every meeting I'm at, somebody's
It's usually me.
It is usually. It's usually. Some of you might notice that Bonnie is not here tonight. David Leduc, who I'll let him give a little introduction before we start the show, or the presentation part of the show, is joining me co-chair, and I'm grateful to you for sitting with me. So thanks.
Yeah, of course. Glad to be here. I'm David Leduc. I'm the executive director for the foundation. I've been with the organization for around 3 years now. Most of you have probably seen me at some of the meetings, conferences, obviously the living room where I've sat in before. I always enjoy coming up here, especially with someone who I know as well as Jacob. And Danielle made me promise that we would make sure we kept the questions pertinent, at least through the first 2 live hours. And then we're going to do like a Bill Maher after-hour special that will stream live on Facebook. That should be fun. And to all the people on Facebook, sorry, I know I said I would be moderating the discussion like I normally do, but I know Dr. Amy Moore is filling in admirably to answer questions and pass them along to Michelle. So look forward to being with all of you tonight and another great discussion.
Great. Thanks, David. Mr. Don. Yeah.
Thanks, Danielle. My name is Don Stranathan, and Dr. Sands, welcome. And I was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in June of 2009, so I'm coming up in almost 10 years. And probably the biggest thing that I want to share is the fact that I glean a lot of what I learn at places like the living room and in groups and that. And I've tried to be my own advocate ever since I was diagnosed. I was told, I had a tumor in my bronchus tube. They wanted to give me 10 hits of radiation. I said, well, if I could have gotten 35 before they found the spot in my other lung, then I want at least 15. I was offered Taxol carbo as a first-line chemotherapy. I'd heard about Avastin. I continued to advocate until I got all 3 added to my mix. And then back then, they didn't do a lot of mutation testing, so I went on Tarceva for 6 years, was stable for an entire 6 years, and I didn't find out till 2015 I didn't even have the EGFR mutation, just got lucky. So I went on to 2 different immunotherapies. I'm now on a triplet, the Keynote 189 triplet that just came out of clinical trials about a year or so ago, and I'm doing amazing. I just had my 11th infusion yesterday, and after 4 infusions, my tumors all shrunk 50%. So I'm already in that plan, that plan B mode. I'm looking at, that's why I wanted to be here tonight. I know there's some new immunotherapy and vaccine trials, and then there's another one that's getting real close to being approval. That's a new combination of immunotherapy and chemo. So anyway, welcome.
Thanks, Don. No, if you have a question, will you grab them?
Excuse me?
Who was your provider?
I have Kaiser Permanente in Santa Rosa, but anytime I have progression, I always go out for a second opinion. I get next generation sequencing, and even if it's just a tumor in my lung, I get a brain MRI, bone scan, PET scan, and biopsy to make sure it hadn't spread.
I think it points back to why it's important to be an educated, empowered
Absolutely.
patient so that you can go advocate for yourself and those things, regardless of where you're being treated. Ron, hi.
Hi, I'm Ron Fong, and I'm a patient advocate at this point for lung cancer. My wife participated in 3 phase 1 trials, and it was interesting. You have to get Plan B in place because you have to be healthy sick enough to get on a trial. You can't wait till Hail Mary at the end and say, oh, I'm really desperate now. Don't do that. Do it early to get on a trial. We did the INC 280 trial. 280, the Abby 399, and then a heat shock protein one. And but we did well. I have some creams here tonight, if anybody wants some, for lotions for skin issues. I have a red dress, but I'm not going to show it.
You're not going to share it. Thanks, Ron. Ron and Dave, as you guys well know, and a lot of patients, they come here and they share little tips and little advice for whether it's some type of a lotion
samples.
and they bring samples too.
Which is
So
great.
it's very nice. Yeah. Yeah.
He makes no money on
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no conflict there.
Hi, I'm Ina Bauman, and coming up on almost 4 years from an accidental finding and diagnosis of lung cancer, which was, I was lucky to have it be surgically removed. 2 surgeries actually took, but I don't need now any follow-up medication or radiation or chemo or any kind of treatment. Just, I do have several nodules on the right side. Most of my left lobe is gone. Upper is all gone, and lower, I guess, is about 1/3 gone. So a little bit of a deficit in lung capacity, but as you know, lungs are great. They don't regenerate, but they do compensate. So that's been a good thing. I do have several nodules on the right side that are just being watched, and watch and wait, right? I do want to just say one thing about Dana-Farber. My sister was diagnosed with lymphoma, not lung cancer, and just came off of an amazing trial in Dr. Fisher's lab for lung cancer at Dana-Farber, and is no evidence of disease. I guess they don't use that for lymphoma. There's some other term that they use, which I can't remember what it is. But anyway, I just wanted to say kudos to Dana-Farber.
Thank you for that. And I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Ina Bauman.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, thanks,
thank you.
Ina.
Hi, I'm Sally, and I put myself into the IL-CAP program because I was at high risk for developing lung cancer. It ran in my family, and I was a smoker, but I had quit. And 5 years into the program, into the study, one of my nodules really grew. So I had surgery. I had my lower right lobe removed. I have other nodules, but nothing's really grown of any importance. And it's been 9.5 years, so I'm very, very lucky. And I want to also bring up, got to get my ads in.
There you go. Thanks, Sally.
Giving Tuesday, which is the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, November 27th, if you live on the peninsula, Amici's Pizza in Redwood Shores, that's the only one that will do it, will give us 25% of anything you eat, or I don't know if it's drink, but anything you eat, and you can either eat it there or take it out. So if you want to just stop on your way home, and this will be all day long. I will post this on Facebook, and I'm hoping that we can get some emails out, because you do have to bring this with you for us to get the credit. And if you're going to do it through Facebook, if you can copy the picture and then just print it out, make a PDF of it. Anyway, I got my plug in. You'll hear me next month, too.
Thanks, Sally.
Jen, I think we should do a staff lunch on that day with the
Oh, that's a
Michis.
great idea.
Yeah, that way we can support it.
Yeah.
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 Maybe we'll make it an open party. People can join us for pizza
Yeah.
that day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm buying.
We're buying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just can't eat it on the new furniture.
Yeah. But wouldn't that be, I think that's a nice way to support it and do something.
Okay. Hi, my name is Tina, and I was diagnosed at stage 3B almost 8 years ago. Next month, and it'll be 8 years, so it's pretty good. I'm pretty happy about that. I did have chemo and radiation, and after that, I was tested positive. I did test positive for EGFR, so I went on Tarceva, just more for insurance after the treatment, more of a maintenance thing, I suppose. But every year my doctor says, well, let's reevaluate in a year and just stay on it. It's working, and let's not rock the boat. So I've been on Tarceva 7 years. So
Wow.
it's a good thing for Tarceva.
Well, I'm Rick, and I'm supposedly her caregiver, but she gives me more care than I give her. So anyway, but I found something about my health yesterday that I really am excited about as I went to the eye doctor with some issues with my vision, and I've been wearing glasses forever. I have cataracts, and I'm going to get cataract surgery so I can get rid of my glasses.
Wow.
Isn't that exciting?
That's exciting. And it's a good thing you have a caregiver. Rick.
Hi, I'm Rick. I was diagnosed with stage 4 adenocarcinoma back in February of 2015. I went through, I've been treated at Kaiser Santa Clara. I went through 12 months of chemo, 14 rounds, and towards the end, one of my tumors on my adrenal gland stopped responding, and they were able to remove that surgically. Then I went on a Taxotere for 3 months, and at the end of that, in February of 2016, my PET scans were clean, and I've been no evidence of disease since for 2.5 years.
That's great.
I only had a small complication a year after that where I had a blood clot in my vein that went from my knee up into my groin, and that took me a month or two to get through that. But ever since, I've been doing okay.
Thanks, Rick.
Hi, I'm Marie. I'm Ina's friend. Let's see, I just diagnosed with stage 4B lung cancer, and I just started chemo on the 5th, and I have carboplatin and alitma, and the study at ASCO, and you can even look it up to date. I'm actually starting an immunotherapy, Keytruda, even though I don't have any of the characteristics. So I'm PD-L1 low, EFGR negative, ALK negative. What am I missing?
ROS1.
BRAF.
That one also nothing. The disappointment was PD-L1 because that would have been a real good match for Keytruda. But anyway, I just started.
Where are you being treated?
Who asked?
Me, sorry.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
With Dr. Colochi, and I work in pharma that's working on lung cancer, but small cell lung cancer, so nothing that would help me. But I'm around a lot of doctors who actually got me in to get a chest x-ray. And then they found that on the chest x-ray.
I can't help but guess, are you with AbbVie?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
At STEM Center.
Yeah, okay, yep.
My name is Dave. I'm going to have Barb give the update, but first off, welcome. And I remember when I first came 18 months ago, newly diagnosed and started treatment just a couple days after coming here for the first time. And you have your act together. So I just remember the deer in the headlights look that I had. Considering what you're going through, you're doing fabulous. So keep it up. I just wanted to share my thoughts on the walk before I let Barb continue on. It's been 18 months, and I've been on 3 walks, 2 in San Francisco and 1 in Chicago. And if you haven't been on one of the walks that this organization puts on, I would highly recommend going. You will be shocked at the support you get from your friends and family. But more than that, even if you if you have a large team, a small team, it really doesn't matter. The energy that is there that day, that is all about the hope and the support that you get from this group, is tremendous. So I would highly recommend either start your own team or just join in with somebody else and be part of their team. But just come. It's really quite an event.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, so he's asked me to do the medical roundup today. So, because as
Barb,
you know,
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Will you do me a favor and just let Dr. Sands know how you guys found out about this? Because I think he'll really appreciate.
Oh, because he has the bulldog socks on?
The serendipity
He's a
of
dog guy, yeah. So, okay, so for those of you who don't know, Dave was diagnosed on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday. I'm sure you can all imagine. We were devastated. I went to the dog park because that's what I do on Wednesdays with my dog, and that's part of my community, and I was crying, and there was a woman there who said, oh, you know, do you know about the Bonnie Adario Lung Cancer Foundation? I was like, no. And she's like, well, it's like internationally known, but it's right in San Carlos. And like one of my best friends, it's her mother-in-law that started it. And it's really amazing. And I was like, so, okay. So I got to tell you, because you all know that have been diagnosed, people have lots of suggestions for you, don't they, when they find out you've been diagnosed. And I'm like, okay, I roll my eyes because we'd already received 5 cancer cookbooks from his brother-in-law. And so I came home and I gave him this link and I said, somebody at the dog park says, you know, this is something you should check out. And he went online and he said, God, this actually looks pretty good. And so that was, let's see, diagnosed Tuesday, dog park Wednesday, called Michelle on Thursday. We met with her on Friday. We weren't seeing the oncologist, Dr. Colochi, until Tuesday. And by then we already had our patient handbook, our 26 questions to ask your oncologist, everything. And we were like so knowledgeable. We knew what all those things were. It was like, it really helped that deer in the headlines thing. It was really amazing. So, yeah. Thanks. And since then, amazingly enough, there's now another guy at the dog park whose stepdad has it. And that's one of the things I just want to say before I get into his update. You know, we know that sometimes it's hard to talk about. There's a stigma with lung cancer, but the more you talk about it, since the walk in Chicago, one of our, we had our financial advisor team in Chicago with us. One of those guys' mom has been diagnosed with lung cancer, stage 4. One of the women on our walk, Dave's high school friend that flew in from Denver to walk with him, the week after the walk, her brother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. One of the women in his music appreciation class that was at the walk, one of her best friends who's also in the class, last week was diagnosed with lung cancer. So it's everywhere. We know it's everywhere, but when people know you have it or you're going through it, they reach out to you. So it's important to talk about it when you can.
Thanks, Mark.
Anyway,
and it's important to know that, sorry, I'm interrupting you again, that this network and what is created from it is, I think, one of the most amazing things that comes from being involved in a group like this and being aware and being educated. And of course, you guys know that we're here globally to help whoever needs the help, whether it's access to an expert like Dr. Sands. It doesn't matter where they are. We can get them in the right place.
Okay, so I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. Diagnosed a little over a year and a half ago, March of 2017, stage 4 adenocarcinoma, EGFR positive. He's been on Tarceva since then. Really good results early on. He also had mets in the brain and in the lymph nodes. So under the Tarceva, the tumor in the lung has shrunk and to less than half that size and remained stable. The mets in the brain, ever since stereotactic radiosurgery to the brain, have remained stable. He gets another scan on Friday. And then the problem has been the lymph node. So somebody talked about Plan B, and that's been the Plan B because the lymph node has been growing a little and showing more aggressive metabolic activity. So he had the stereotactic body radiation, their SBRT therapy, to that lymph node, which is really, really tricky, formerly known as the no-fly zone, right? Because it's a really difficult spot to radiate. But they did that. They didn't kill him. That was a good news. So he's feeling okay. It's kind of wiped him out a little, but he had to go off the Tarceva during that time. He's going back on it. So he's starting to get the rash back and all that stuff, like really in full force, so dealing with that. But he will be, if this doesn't stop the lymph node, if this hasn't worked, you know, we've talked about clinical trial possibilities for Tagrisso and something else combined. I don't know, but there are just some different possibilities. I know that Dr. Blakely has talked about with Dr. Colochi. So we're kind of in the wait and see mode. Of course, we won't know if this has really worked for a while, but we're hoping.
Great. Thanks, Barb.
Do you want to?
Zoya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zoya Gerard. I am an industry professional and also a patient advocate. I work for Caris Life Sciences. Caris Life Sciences does molecular tumor profiling and by next generation sequencing and others. I've been working with the Adario Lung Cancer Foundation for over 5 years. In previous roles and in this role, I think this is a phenomenal organization. What I've seen them do for patients is like no other. The fact that they bring out speakers like Dr. Sands is just an honor. I always learn when I come, and I'm always humbled by the stories that I hear. They keep me grounded and remind me of why I do what I do. And so I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoya.
Good evening. My name is Wayne. I'm Rebecca's husband here, and my wife last year in November was diagnosed with adenocarcinoma, stage 3B. We went and did chemo radiation as suggested by our doctors, and right after that, we immediately moved to durvalumab as per the Pacific trial. During that time, I don't think that it worked because her tumors grew in size, and she also caught a brain metastases. So right now we've switched over to chemotherapy, which consists of carboplatin, Alimta, and Avastin. After 2 cycles, we did a scan, and it showed a small bit of progress. And so we're continuing that course, and we're going to do another scan in a couple weeks. And, did I forget anything?
We
didn't double this time, so we're hopeful.
Yes. So the tumors haven't gone any bigger, so we're hopeful. And I guess the one thing we learned was during this long window was that once you get on that train, it's hard to get off the train for the treatments, because I think we were told that while we're doing chemo radiation that maybe she had been more progressed, stage 4 possibly, but we were doing a stage 3B type therapy. So I think we learned a lot during that, but we're hopeful that this next round of treatment is going to be good for us.
You guys had quite the road trying to get your molecular testing and the biopsies and all of that stuff, was it?
Yeah. The original core biopsy that led to the diagnosis didn't take from Foundation Medicine. So once we got on that treatment plan, we couldn't get any other tissues. And then when we noticed some progression, she had to endure a VATS surgery, which was pretty painful. And but she's a trooper, and so I think it's important to get all your data lined up and ready to go before you go under something that's 6 months.
Thanks, you guys. Where's the puppy?
The doctor also said to...
Oh, is she there?
Oh. She's asleep. He also said, if it's not hurting you, we're going to go ahead and leave you on to durvalumab. And I think in the end, I would have said, now looking back, I would have said, let's scan and find out if it's hurt first. Because not that it caused it, but it did double in growth and quantity during that time frame. And a very short time frame it was. So.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, Fred.
Hello. My name is Fred Palmer. I was diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer in October of 2013, and I'm currently on immunotherapy.
My name's Eric Acker. I'm a patient advocate, and I think we should take a moment to recognize Paul Allen, who died yesterday. He's first diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 1982. So he lived a long time with it. So living a long time with cancer, very hopeful.
Thanks, Eric.
My name is Christy Peterson. I'm here with a friend whose sister has recently been diagnosed. But my daughter used to attend this meeting. and she got a lot of comfort and support from everybody, and she learned a lot. It empowered her.
And I'm here with my friend and my sister who's online in Oregon.
Hi, online in Oregon.
Hi, my name is Karen, and I am a 10, almost 11-year survivor. My tumor was found by accident very early, so I was very fortunate. I was just a stage 1B and had surgery immediately, and then had carboplatin and cisplatin treatment. And as with Bonnie, I was one of Fred Marcus's patients, one of his last patients. So, and I'm now here more in support of this amazing foundation. And yes, the walk was the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen, by far. And I want to be at them the rest of my life. So if you haven't been, you need to go. It's phenomenal. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Hi, my name is Evangeline, and I was diagnosed with, first of all, non-small cell lung cancer, NSCLC adenocarcinoma, 19 months ago. That was March 2017. At first, I was scheduled for a surgery on the upper left lobe, lobectomy, on April 27th, but day before the surgery, I received a call that I should have an emergency MRI on my head. So that started the devastation. I said, I'm ready. I had my pre-op exam ready, and why do I need an MRI? And I found out that the PET scan they ordered for me was only from neck down. And so everybody thought that I only have 1 to 0 stage of lung cancer. But day before surgery, 9:30 in the evening, I found the radiologist said that they found 2 spots on my head. Following day, they told me the surgery was canceled. Following day, they told me the MRI report was finished, and so the surgeon, thoracic oncologist says, officially now you're categorized as stage 4 because they found a tumor, 8 millimeters tumor on my right brain and 8 millimeters on my right brain and 12 millimeters on the left bone of the skull. So I said, am I terminal now? Because just the thought of stage 4 is so new to me, and I know stage 4 is the end of life. So anyway, they started treatment on me. I started Tarceva on May 22nd, and after 11 weeks of taking Tarceva, they did a CAT scan on my lungs again, and it reduced by 1 centimeter. It was originally 3.6 centimeters when they found it. Actually, I'm like Aina. They found my cancer accidental because I applied at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital as a certified nurse assistant, and I did my orientation and got my badge, and a week before I start working, they told me I need a chest x-ray to check if I have TB. But tuberculosis was ruled out, and they saw the mass on my upper left lobe. And I'm blessed, and all the nuns who are my spiritual family said, you are blessed it was detected early, as well as the metastasis on my head. So now, the last report I had, so I am being monitored every 3 months for CAT scan and MRI, both at the same time, which my oncologist, Dr. Neil from Stanford, requires me to have. So as of August 7, I had my PET scan, and August 6, my MRI. My oncologist says it's dormant. I had a cyberknife radiation on my brain, the right side of my brain, and the tumor is almost gone now. But the problem is the tumor on my left bone of the skull has increased by 5 millimeters. And so in December, I will know if it has been stable, but the rest of the tumor are dormant, according to my oncologist. And I'm very thankful that my social worker from Stanford encouraged me to come to this organization because it gave me hope. Because the last 17 months, I've always been emotional because I have no family around. So it made me strong coming here, knowing that I'm not the only one who has stage 4 lung cancer. And I always pray that this organization will be supported by more people. Thank you.
Thanks, Evangelia. You know you have a whole big family here that's on your team whenever you need us. And hopefully from listening to other people's stories and patients who are stage 4 who have been doing this a long time, it makes you feel hopeful about what your tomorrow looks like.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I have a stage 4 small cell with SIADH, which totally destroyed my sodium last year. Lost the ability to walk, was going into a coma, was stroking out, the whole thing. And they couldn't figure out why I kept losing my sodium. And it took 3 months in the hospital. Then a resident decided to do one more test before they let me go. And then that's when they found the small cell. But they still didn't think it was cancer because they said they've never seen anything quite like that. And at that point, I realized it was probably pretty rare and started treatment right away, chemotherapy with platinums, and finished the 6 complete cycles. And then he put me on immunotherapy, and within 6 treatments of the immunotherapy, which I was finally feeling good, the cancer grew back, and it also created 2 more tumors. And so I went right back on the platinums, but after 2 more sessions of the platinums, I got very toxic. So my doctor referred me to clinical trials at Stanford, and that doctor said, you need to come off the chemo. And so I've been trying to still come off the chemo. And then they're deciding, there's a debate on what they should do with me now. There's another immunotherapy. One of them I was already on, where the cancer came back and grew. But I guess it's going to be in tandem with another one. Or I can do nothing and wait till it comes back and do something else. I mean, so there's 2 choices, but neither one is really good. So I'm in the process of debating which way to go. But it's kind of nice to feel good for a moment anyway. But anyway, so it's nice to hear another small cell person. So thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Nancy. Do you guys want to say hi since you have a mic?
Hi. We're here every living room, so we're used to being here, and thank you guys all for coming. We appreciate hearing all your stories. It makes us so thankful to be here for all of you.
Who are you?
Yeah. Oh, I'm Jennifer. And they all know me. I'm here all the
No,
time.
there's new people.
Plus people
I'm
online.
Jennifer I'm the director of national events, so thank you for the San Francisco 5K plugs. That was amazing. And Sally. Yeah. Thank you guys very much.
I'm Andrea Parks, Danielle's little sister. Just like to remind everybody of that. I love being here every month to hear everybody's stories, and I'm so grateful for you guys, and especially for you guys to have this room. My mom didn't have this room, which is why she built this room. There was no support, and we should have rooms like this all over the country, and we're working on that. Thanks to the support of the San Francisco 5Ks. That was music to my ears, Dave, because people don't really give that shout out, but people need those days where they have the hope and the spirit and the love and everything that comes of that. So thank you. And we didn't even have to pay you, which is even more amazing. Oh, and Karen backed it up too, which is like an even salary. I mean,
And they brought drinks, so that was nice. Yeah.
How'd you get that?
You got to know people.
Wow, I got to know people. So never mind, Dave. I take all that back.
Secret sounds.
No, but seriously, having partners like Dr. Sands here who believe in advocacy and what we do is just as important, because when diagnosed, if physicians don't know of groups like us and refer their patients to us, I really think it's a disadvantage to newly diagnosed patients. So thank you very much.
We shouldn't have to rely on people finding us at dog parks.
Kim, you want to
be
say?
nice.
I don't know if Kim
Yeah.
wants to say hi.
Kim, did you want to say hello? No?
No.
All right.
Hi, I'm Kim Shapoister. I work for the foundation as an office administrator, all to go-to mom of the family, besides Bonnie, I should say. But thank you for all coming. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Kim. I'm going to give Kim a shout out that she ensures that there is food here every month, that there is wine here every month, that there is water here every month, napkins, you name it. She makes sure that that everyone's being fed. Michelle, do you have anybody online that wants to say hello or anything at all before I move to Dr. Sands? Oh, you lost connection. Oh, so to anyone who might be watching via YouTube.
Maybe go to is Facebook still up? Okay.
Okay. Maybe Kim's going to check that out right now. Thank
To
you.
be continued.
Sorry to anybody who's on YouTube who's watching, because I know you can still see me, right? Or no? Well, you don't know. Actually, maybe it's a black screen.
I can go find out.
That's all right. There's no screen. Can they hear me?
Facebook?
Nothing.
Facebook? Is it going? Facebook is up. It's up? Facebook's up? So maybe switch over to Facebook if you can hear us.
Yeah.
We're streaming.
Yeah. So with that, they're back on? We're back on.
Well, there you go.
We're back on. So let me know when you see it, and then I'll apologize again. Yeah, okay. So thank you all for sharing your stories. I think it's especially important for some of the new people either in the room or who might be signing in live via Facebook or trying through through YouTube, or people who might come back and watch it later. It's so important to feel part of something, as Evangeline said, to not feel so alone. So thank you all for sharing your stories tonight. And with that, I'm going to I'm going to make a comment about Dr. Sands first, then I'm going to ask him to introduce himself and talk a little bit about why or where he came from, how he got into lung cancer, and why it's important. But what I will tell you is the very first time I met Dr. Sands was at a conference in Southern California, and he became like my soul brother immediately. We, to the whole family, actually, we were all in this like a bus that took us to dinner after the conference or something, and we just absolutely connected. And I just want to reiterate what my sister Andrea said about him. Not only as an amazing physician and oncologist, but an amazing human being. So with that, who are you?
So my name is Jacob Sands. I'm a thoracic medical oncologist at Dana-Farber. So I really treat people just with lung cancer. That's the only diagnosis that people see me for. And my disclosure is I absolutely adore the entire Addario family, Addario organization. The feeling has been very much mutual from the first time that I met them. And I'll say professionally, when I see people, I think the aspect of what goes on for an individual that within the medical field we do not adequately address is that social isolation that I think a lot of individuals feel. They get diagnosed with something, as Barb said, they get told a million things that they should do, they shouldn't do, and I try and warn people about some of that too, because I think a lot of people are trying to be very helpful. It comes from a very good place. They're told all the things they should do, all the things they shouldn't do. Many times there's conflict between what one person said and what another person said, and so you kind of get bombarded with this information that you don't quite know what to do with, but sometimes people also just act differently. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to interact with you. And so I watch people start feeling somewhat lonely with the diagnosis as well. Even sometimes while people really are rallying around them, I think that there can be a feeling of that. So having a setting like this to come together to see other people who are personally going through it, not only as patients, but as advocates as well. Family members are here and they see other family members. I watch couples where the husband and wife, even though they're working as a team, are both really personally experiencing something that the other person isn't quite experiencing. And that whole dynamic of things, I watch be a challenge for many couples. So to have a setting like this, to have an organization like this, I just think there's tremendous value in that. And I'll acknowledge that I think as a medical field, although we really try and take care of the entire individual, the entire family, this can be an aspect that is more difficult within our setting as opposed to a setting like this. So thank you all for doing all that you do. So I did my training at UC Davis up the road in Sacramento. I was there for 7 years before then moving to Boston because my family is on the East Coast. So I was choosing between Boston and New York City, and Boston to me was a clear choice. So I've been there now for 6 years. I started out at Leahy, a hospital there that's more of a community center that does academic work, thinking that I really wanted to be in a setting with less of the bureaucracy, and found that bureaucracy on the other side is actually infrastructure. And so for the clinical trial stuff that I was trying to do, I needed that infrastructure to support some of the other stuff I was doing, so then I'd no longer call it bureaucracy, which was a good shift in my perception of things. So I've been there for a year now, focusing really on small cell lung cancer, has been my real focus. I lead our clinical research program in small cell lung cancer. That being said, I still write trials within non-small cell. I still see a lot of people within non-small cell as well. So kind of the spectrum. But it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you tonight.
Thanks. I'm writing notes, which was why there was a weird, awkward pause. So thank you, Jacob, for the introduction and talking about, sort of where you came from and what you're doing now. With that, we're going to jump right in. And if you wouldn't mind starting with something that we started this conversation with tonight, which is the different types of clinical trials. There's a lot of misnomers about clinical trials, which I want to kind of get through tonight. But I also, a lot of times, there's a tendency for people to think that they're just strictly treatment trials available as opposed to some of the other things. So can you talk a little bit about the difference in some of the trials?
Yeah. So if I can, though, just start out with a couple of really just the basis of clinical trials and something that is absolutely at the foundation of what to know about trials. Because I think a lot of people come in with very different ideas of what trials means, and I see people who come in very familiar with trials and very interested, and I see others who come in extremely skeptical, insisting they don't want a placebo. And that is kind of an older way of looking at trials, although placebos do still exist. So I kind of want to start from there. Any trial being discussed for an individual is being discussed as a best option for that individual. Yes, we can move the field forward. Yes, we can learn more and treat people in the future better. But that trial is not being discussed with any individual other than to help that individual. And anyone here who is on a trial or a trial is being discussed, it doesn't matter what happens for people generations to come. It is about what is going to help you. Now, hopefully that drug helps and is good and becomes a new standard of care and therefore helps a lot of people. But nobody goes on a trial to help everybody else, not a treatment trial. It is about, and you are allowed and should be very selfish about any treatments you're going on. I say that across the board. When someone is talking with their doctor about a treatment to go on, that is 100% about what will help that individual. And that's the basis for everything. So that is an absolute truth that I think people don't necessarily come in with understanding. Now, there are other aspects that can be, hey, is it okay if we collect an extra tube of blood? Is it okay if we do other analysis on tissue that had been previously biopsied? Or in some cases, is it okay if we do a new biopsy because we're trying to gain better understanding? Those aspects can be absolute giving to science. A blood sample or a biopsy that's not necessarily going to guide an individual person's treatment options can be. But as far as what treatment drugs that are being chosen, that is 100% about what's going to help that individual. And really, we utilize trials as a way of finding a better way of doing things than what we have now. So that being said, if it's a first line, so someone gets newly diagnosed and a trial is being discussed, that is going to have, at a very minimum, the best known treatment option. That's true for all scenarios, but especially when it's first, that ends up being a lot of different options typically. So you're looking at that plus something else, or something that also has been proven. So at any of these, it's doing, at a minimum, the best of the current standard, and then looking for something better, hoping that that something better works even better for that person. So to kind of go through some of it, though. So there are different phases of trials. So phase one, this is phase one is first in human testing. This is after it's been tested in a lab and been really impressive in petri dishes, tested in mice or sometimes even in other animals, and been very promising in those settings as well, where the drug is working extremely effectively and the toxicities are minimal. And it really has to be not borderline. It has to be very clear, very exciting in those settings to even go to phase one testing. Phase one testing is we have a whole bunch of data from petri dishes, from mice, and so forth, to guide how much drug we think we need. But since it's being tested in humans for the first time, we need to really test and see what kind of toxicities come about, what kind of level of drug is tolerated, and that is started at a low dose. And frequently there's a mechanism for, and it can be different in different trials, of essentially enrolling people onto this drug in a setting where it will hopefully help them as well. But we're starting at a low dose, and we're going to work our way up to see how it's tolerated. If it gets to a level where people are having side effects, then it gets dropped back down a dose, and that's how we find what is the dose that's really tolerated.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So in these phase one trials, when you are trying to figure out the dosages that work, is initially the same dose given to men, women, regardless of height, weight, everything?
Well, so it depends on how the dosing is. It can be dosed on body surface area, which is a way of using height and weight, or it could be just a flat dose. So that can vary. It could be a dose per kilogram. So dosing can vary as far as the absolute, but if it's 30 milligrams per kilogram, that's what's given to everybody. But the actual number of milligrams can vary based on how the kilogram.
Does it also vary? So let's assume someone's on a trial and their side effects are increasing at X dose.
Yeah.
Is there an option to lower that dose within the trial so that they can stay on drug as opposed to being?
And it's almost always mandated to be so. So when people go onto a trial, if they're having side effects, just like any drug off trial, if they're having side effects, that dose is held or that dose is reduced. There are certain drugs where reducing it may not really matter. And so there are certain side effects that can come up where they just say, you know what, the risk of this is higher than the benefit, and so we're stopping. But all of that is really written in a very detailed way into the protocol so that any side effects are dealt with as well.
How long does a phase one trial typically last? Does that vary also?
It varies a lot, and it depends on what you're treating. So there are some that are for anyone who has a solid tumor, colon, breast, lung, all of that. They can be enrolled onto this study if they believe that that drug seems like it may be effective for all of those different populations, then they enroll. And that may enroll faster than something that, say, is for a more rare kind of a cancer.
What type of number of patients are usually on a phase one trial? Or does it vary greatly too?
Well, it varies, but I mean, certainly depending on how many ultimately end up getting, how many levels you go to before people are having side effects. But for the most part, I'd say it's very common to enroll 3 and then see what the side effect is like for those 3, and then enroll another 3 after you've seen that that's been well tolerated. Now, there are some others where they will enroll more than 3 in a dosing cycle.
That's per center or nationally? Or?
Nationally.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. So it'll be small numbers and see how that gets tolerated. And if everyone tolerates it well, then you bump up to the next dose. But because of that, it can take a while, because in some cases, it'll be a matter of watching those people for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, to make sure that they've tolerated it well before then going to the next level. And in some situations, it can even be more than that.
Has anyone ever been in a phase 1 trial? Show of hands.
Annie, my girlfriend, was phase 1.
We grabbed your mic, Don.
Repurposed clinical trial at Stanford, Dispabine. It was a drug for depression, and they were finding promise in a mouse model, but she never did get through the phase 1 because the dosing got to it was creating other side effects.
And Ron, you said Joan was on 3?
3 of them. Do you want to talk about the experience at all?
We found through the Dario Lung Cancer Foundation 3 phase 1 trials at UC Davis, working with Dr. Gandera and Dr. Reese. So like we were patient 2 in cohort 1 of one trial.
Wow.
And it was like, really, we're the second patient to ever try this stuff? So they were just putting the formulas together and trying to figure out how many pills to give you. So we were doing 24 pills a day in the morning and 24 in the evening. And now I understand it's in the phase 2 and it's down to 1 because they figured it out. But that was a lot of pills.
Well, and it may also be that the dose is actually different, but the company is now manufacturing for that dose.
Right. Yeah. Whereas back then it was just, they're still figuring it all out. So phase 1's gonna be kind of interesting. We did so that was the INC 280, and then we did an AbbVie 399 trial, which is in a phase 2 now, and then we did a heat shock protein 90 trial.
Yeah.
How do you determine, coming from preclinical or mouse models or whatever dosage the animals are getting, how do you equate that to how is that equated back to a human?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on the specifics of the drug as far as how that's done. And honestly, I don't know the math of it. Yeah. I know that within trials, they'll say, well, this dose equates to such and such. And they'll try and really predict what might be, what to expect as far as side effect profile. So they'll say, well, in such and such a situation with such and such animals, this is what we saw. And in some situations, that's relevant for humans, and in others, it's not. But as far as the math of that, I'm not sure. But there is a calculation that's done.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions on phase 1? Anybody questions? Phase 1 trials in the room, online? No. So I'm just. Ron. Yeah.
So do you go from a petri dish to a mouse and then to humans, or is it sometimes it just? How does it get there? Is it always through mice studies?
Interesting.
Always, probably. I mean, that's very, very common. Very, very common.
We do plan, Ron, just as an FYI, on having a meeting, and we talked about this, about the whole preclinical space. Like, what does that look like, literally, from the petri dish to the
first trial?
The first trial, yeah. And then ultimately to the patient. Yeah. That whole, we've never really talked about it from the research sort of, angle, and how it gets from that first little dish to...
Yeah, even explaining what preclinical models are and the different types that are now being developed and what's going on in that space, it's really changing quite a bit. So.
Well, and actually, so the one situation where using mice or animals is actually very difficult is with the immunotherapies, because that's using human immune system. And so it's very common where we'll take tumors and put them into mice and graft them into mice. These are called PDX models. And then treat. And when you're using more typical kinds of chemotherapy that treats those tumors. But when it's something to get the human immune system to react to it, that's a difficult. So then there are models like organoids, which maybe you guys will end up talking about, of where those cells can be exposed to immune system and see how those reactions happen, but that can be a difficult setting to test that in.
And so one last question before I move on to phase 2, and there'll be similar questions with each phase, and as we're talking about it, when might a phase 1 trial most likely be appropriate for a patient?
Well, so phase 1 is usually, I mean, that's kind of more typical for when there aren't other great proven therapies. So that is that we don't have a treatment that's really that exciting. There might be proven treatments, but just things that don't tend to work as well as we want, or have some toxicities that we don't want. So it's more of a when there isn't a great treatment option, where we're saying, hey, this is a very promising drug in the lab, in mice, in other situations, and now we're going to test it.
Great. Anybody else before we go to phase 2?
Marie.
Oh, we grab a, sorry.
It's right on the table. Oh, right in front of me.
Sorry.
This is so people online can hear as well.
Yeah, we like
so.
to make it difficult.
Doctor, I have a question for you. How do you work, given that you're an academic center, how do you work with those in non-academic centers? So I worked over at Northwestern and UCSF HEMONC, so I kind of saw that part. Now I'm in pharma, so I can see that part, but how do the academic centers work with something like PAMF, where it's not an academic center?
Yeah.
And how do you pull patients and, is PAMF interested in doing clinical trials, or do they just refer them over to Stanford or
Yeah, it's a great
Memorial
question.
Sloan Kettering or somewhere else?
It's a great question. So around the Boston area, I'll see people from New York, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and then sometimes we see people from Florida, Colorado, China as well. But within the area, we'll see a handful of states in the area will come in. And I see people, and if I think there is a clinical trial that is absolutely worth it, I will let them know, and they almost always would then have to be treated at Dana-Farber. Now, sometimes these trials are available in other areas around, in which case, absolutely try and set them up there. My goal is to treat somebody in the best way and in the most convenient way that can be done, keeping the quality. Now, there are some trials that I say this is really just so far beyond in what it's bringing within the setting that it is worth the 3-hour drive to get this treatment. And others where I say, we have a trial, but I don't expect it to be as big in advance as we want. We really hope it's a good step forward. We believe in it, which is why we're running it. But it's not the thing that's going to take you away from your family to get your treatment. So let's keep in touch and see you at the next time. But here's something you can do locally as well. And I really try and balance those with individuals. And then people who are treated throughout all of those states, I contact their oncologist, their local oncologist, and say, hey, here's the discussion we had. Here's the treatment we discussed. In many cases, that's the same treatment that their local oncologist discussed. And I said, I reinforced your plan. This is clearly the right thing to do, as you know already. And I am available. Any questions, any concerns, anything I can do, can I email you so that you have my email so you can reach out to me at any time? And that way, people can really be treated locally. They can be treated by someone around the corner. Now, in many cases, that might not be somebody who treats only lung cancer. So it is impossible to stay up on everything. Thankfully, within oncology now and cancer care now, the advances are happening so rapidly that it is just impossible to stay up on all of it. And so I am available to them. In many cases, this is someone who's treating both blood disorders and solid tumors. So they can reach out at any time. And I have people that text me, I have people that email me, I have people that call. And medical professionals.
So you're going to ASCO and the World Lung.
Sorry.
So you're going to obviously ASCO, but also the World Lung Conference. But I don't think my oncologist goes to the World Lung Conference.
Well, actually, they don't have to go to anything. Yeah. I go to all of those, or many of them. But they can reach out to me for anything. So their local oncologist has any kind of question, they say, gosh, we looked at the scan, I don't know, I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure about that, I want to bounce these ideas, they call me. And this happens frequently.
Professional courtesy? Or is it just that you've nurtured these relationships, that you're the lung guy that they know to go to?
Well, they don't have to come to me, but this is the position I want. I mean, I am available to them in any way. So any oncologist can contact me about lung cancer, and I will help them in every way that I can. And I have people that I have seen as a second opinion, and I've said, listen, this is the treatment. I completely agree with your oncologist in many cases. If I don't, I have no qualms about saying exactly what I think. And so there are times people see me and I say, I don't entirely agree with your oncologist. I think this is why probably they're saying this, and often it's very reasonable. I mean, people aren't doing crazy stuff, but here's this subtle difference that I would choose if you were seeing me. And I will talk with your oncologist about it. I will help you to get care closer to home. And you know, sometimes I see people that have a long drive and they just really insist, no, I really want to come here. And if people insist, then absolutely. But I really try to help facilitate them getting treatment in a way that is more convenient for them. And I tell them, we are doing your cancer care around your life. We're not trying to rearrange your life to get cancer care. You're getting the treatment to live your life. And I think psychologically that's a very understandably difficult thing to do. People start thinking 100% about the care. They build their lives around the care. And in some ways, if it's like that, you also lose the other aspects of your life if all of your time is devoted to the care itself. And so if driving 3 hours each way is something I can save you that time, then I want to do that. Or 30 minutes if you have someone around the corner. And I will talk with your oncologist. I'm available to your oncologist, and I will be available, 100%. Now, with people, though, I do say to them, they need to talk to their oncologist. Because if they're calling me and talking to their oncologist, sometimes we're both explaining the same thing in different ways, and it can seem confusing, and then it seems like we aren't on the same lines. But they can always come back and see me again. So anytime there's a scan that looks like it might be progressing, they come back and see me, we look at it again, I again talk with their oncologist. So they can really get treated anywhere, and I'm still available and involved to the extent that they're oncologist and they want me to.
So I just have one comment, Barb, before I go to you. So I just want to point out that this is, to reiterate one thing that Dr. Sands was saying, and then to make another comment. One is, it's one of the beauties of, you know, Dr. Sands and being at Dana-Farber, and he said it early on, all he has to focus on is lung cancer. It is unrealistic to expect a medical oncologist in a community setting, particularly in some of the more rural settings, to know everything there is to know about every type of solid tumor and blood cancer that walks through the door. Things are, especially in today's day with personalized medicine and genomic profiling and what all of this looks like. So to be able to have somebody who can, you know, just focus on one disease or one type of cancer at their fingertips is a huge, huge thing. And then the second thing I want to say is next month's living room, which I'll reiterate at the end of the meeting, is the converse of this, right? Yeah. So it's Dr. Larry Heifetz from Gene Upshaw Cancer Center in Truckee, which is a more rural part of, you know, California, and what his relationship looks like with UC Davis and virtual tumor boards and how they literally get on screen and talk to one another about their cases and their patients so that they can, too, have access to the people who just get to focus on the one thing. So that next month's living room is all about how community centers are using the folks who do.
And he's an amazing individual who has been very much on the forefront of how to connect with academic centers. He's an exceptional individual. He's definitely someone worth meeting.
Go ahead, Barb.
So this is my soapbox about being your own advocate. Several people have talked about it. And what we have learned, because we have this, you have the same oncologist we have, is that nobody like he said, nobody knows as much about lung cancer as people who only focus on lung cancer. But you only have to become an expert on one kind of cancer, and that's yours. And that's your job. And that's what coming here does, and meeting with people and the experts that we've heard over the last couple months. That's how we've become smarter. So we go to our oncologist and we say to her, oh, well, we've heard about this and we've heard about that. And she doesn't know about all those things. And we aren't upset that she doesn't know about them because she can't. She listens to us. She's listened to us. We actually, that's what drove us to second opinion. So if you feel like you're not getting the answers, or I think somebody mentioned if you're progressing on your current treatment, then it is maybe time for a second opinion. And when you go to a second opinion, you're going to want somebody that's only doing lung cancer. So whether it's Dr. Blakely or Heather Wakely, who's been here, or some of the other people, then you go to them, and that's what Kalochi has been talking with Blakely. They talk now regularly. She checks in with Heather, I think, on some things. So, but you have to drive that. So I think if you think that maybe you want to find out if there's clinical trials, you might have to be the one pushing for it. And don't think that that's wrong. It's your job.
And also give your docs a break when you think you're in the waiting room for too long. They're doing this for all of their patients, right? So communicating with one another and then taking the time with the patient in the room to ensure that they know and feel informed about what the decision-making process looks like. Thanks, Ina.
Hi. I have a question. So regardless of what phase the trial is, will doctors usually exhaust all the FDA-approved therapies before recommending a trial?
It's a great question and such an important one, and not necessarily. So phase 1, typically. But there are people with a new diagnosis where the doctor is then talking about clinical trials options. And these are typically proven drugs. These are typically drugs that we're already using, but in later stages, where we're saying, hey, this works so well in this other setting, what about if we use it in this one? And so right off the bat, they may be discussing clinical trials.
And what are the decisions, or how will we choose? Because there seems to be some salesmanship involved in clinical trial. Every hospital has their own combination of drugs. As a patient, how do you choose which one's going to be best for us?
You're jumping ahead in my agenda. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a very good question, and along the lines of what's been said, you know, you should never be shy about any questions you have with your doctor. You should never be shy about doing what you feel like doing. So whether that be seeing another doctor or asking questions or taking more time when you feel like, no, they're busy and this is your life, this is our job. So all of that should come out. But you know, so that's a question you could even ask your doctor as well, is say, hey, as far as clinical trials options, what other center should I consider? Where is going to have the most options? But the more academic the center, typically the more clinical trials focused they are. So, you know, I mean, in the community, they give exceptional care for standard of care options. When you're talking about phase 1, certainly, but clinical trials in general, that's going to be the big academic centers. Now, the community may have some of the bigger, later stage, bigger clinical trials, and we'll get to talking about phase 3 trials, but even some phase 2 trials, where drugs that are established, that they may have those options as well. But as far as the more forefront, what's the newest, that's going to be the bigger academic centers.
And that's one of the things you guys have heard us talk about before, you know, and we talk with industry a lot about, we know that 80% of the patients are seen in the community. Not all of them have access to the Dana-Farbers of the world. So how can we work, especially with some of these larger community cancer centers, to help get some of these clinical trials into those centers so that more patients can have access to it? So you guys have heard us. Go ahead, Don.
I just had a question, Dr. Sands. Since you mentioned you specialize in small cell, I have non-small cell, but my girlfriend had small cell. So, and that was in 2014, before a lot of the immunotherapies and all that. Since you get a lot of small cell patients, I get requests from people, as far as what's out there for small cell. And with non-small cell, you have, first, second, third generation TKIs, immunotherapies, combinations that are all working. But with small cell, the treatments that were available are over 20 years old up until just recently. Now, I know Abby's got the Rovati, and, they're finding, with immunotherapy and combos of Yervoy and Opdivo. But it's sort of a two-part question. And there's been less focus on doing whole brain radiation right out of the gate. Do you recommend your patients go to a first-line chemotherapy and then look at the trials, and what about putting off whole brain radiation and going more to CyberKnife with small cell?
So that's something that's being studied on a trial. So our radiation oncologists are looking at that. That hasn't really been the typical way of going about things within small cell. For if there are multiple brain or a handful of brain mets, historically within small cell lung cancer, it's been more common to give whole brain radiation. But that's something that we're looking at. So that was the second question. Remind me the first question before that.
Well, do you immediately go with your patients?
Yeah, you said if there's to whether you start treatment
trials
first,
or do you hit them with the standard first-line chemotherapy?
So within small cell lung cancer, the first line platinum-based therapy works so well for the vast majority of people at the start. That being said, there are trials, and we just had a trial, it's closed now, of chemotherapy plus pembrolizumab, which is Keytruda. So that is the Keynote 189 regimen people have mentioned here of the chemo plus pembrolizumab. We had the chemo plus pembrolizumab for small cell as well. That trial is now closed. That being said, there is a similar trial that just released their data, which may in fact change the standard of care and use immunotherapy. So that's a good example of frontline setting of new diagnosis and getting chemo plus immunotherapy on a clinical trial as the first course of treatment. So we do have trials in the frontline setting, but the chemotherapy tends to work really well initially. As far as treating the brain off the bat, that really depends a lot from individual to individual. And so it's hard to make a statement that would be true across the board. But if it's not something that is, let me say it this way. If it's something that's small in the brain, if the mets that are in the brain are small and they're not causing symptoms, then doing chemotherapy first is typically the way I go. And then monitoring closely.
Anybody else? No, online, we're good. All right, phase 2.
So phase 2 is taking something where in the phase 1 we say, okay, this is the dose that we're choosing. And there's a lot that goes into that. We've discussed a little bit. And we say, okay, this is the choice, and then we expand it out and say, okay, we're going to enroll, it can vary, 50 people, it can be more, at this dose of this drug or multiple drugs. And then we're really looking at effectiveness. So phase 1 is tolerability, finding the dose that works. But hopefully people really get benefit from it. I mean, that helps guide what we expect from the drug, is we want to see people doing well. Phase 2 is saying, okay, we've decided on the dose. This is the optimal dose, and let's see how well it works in this situation.
At what point do you determine whether or not that might be the best option for a patient? Same question as phase 1.
That is always at the heart of what you're doing to begin with. So anytime you have somebody on a trial, it is because you think that is more likely to benefit them than standard treatment.
Okay, so you said with the phase 1s that's more likely sort of we've sort of gone through standards of care, phase 3 trials. So you go from like a phase 3 to a phase 2 to a phase 1. Like, what is that?
It can be. There have been drugs in phase 1 that have been really exciting. Don, I think at the very beginning, either Don or Ron at the very beginning had mentioned LOXO 292. I'm not, I'll say that was an exciting phase 1. And so that's one that there was data reported at this last ASCO that was very exciting. And so there can be these earlier phase studies that really are exciting. Now that is more an exception to when these really stand out. But it depends on the situation.
And how, same question that David asked earlier, how many patients typically enroll in phase 2 trials?
Phase 2 can vary a lot. And we'll see phase 2s done in a variety of ways. There can be phase 2s that are really a first look at effectiveness, where it's a smaller number of people enrolling, and we see randomized phase 2s that are really more like a small phase 3.
Can you explain randomized?
Randomized is where there is a math to it, where randomization can be done in a few different ways, whether it's 1-to-1, which is common, or 2-to-1. But say if there are 2 different arms to a study. So the small cell study that I mentioned just a minute ago, where it was chemotherapy versus chemotherapy plus Keytruda. So 2 arms. Well, we don't get to choose what people go on. There's a whole math to, we send in a number that represents a person, and they put that into a system, and it spits out which treatment they're getting. And then we have to do that treatment. And that randomization is done to try to make sure that both sides are being treated, that both groups are essentially the same. So, So let me take a step back, actually, in how we even come up with these treatments themselves, how we know anything about these treatments themselves. Now, when I went to medical school, I thought, oh, you go to medical school, and in those 4 years, you learn everything. And when you come out, you just do a test. It tells you what they have, and you do the treatment that works for it, and bang. And I learned that it's like the rest of life. It's really balancing probabilities. You're balancing risk versus benefit. When someone comes in, now sometimes it can be very clear-cut what's going on, and other times you're saying, well, gosh, a common story actually of people I see with lung cancer, they went to their doctor, they had a cough, and their doctor said, oh, you've got an infection, take this antibiotic. And that doctor was right for 99 people. But that one person had lung cancer, and that was what was causing it. But they go by probabilities of it. And then, well, the antibiotic's not working, so okay, let's get a chest x-ray, and now something shows up on the chest x-ray, and they say, well, gosh, that still looks like it could be infection, and you did get better on the antibiotic at first, so let's do more antibiotic, because that also works for the majority of other people like that. But in the end, it turns out it was lung cancer. We'll see. You're also not going to do a CT scan and a biopsy on everybody, or else you're going to be biopsying a whole bunch of people with pneumonia saying, why'd you put me through that? And so a lot of this is balancing risk and benefit and looking at a situation and saying, where was I going with that? Remind me
Oh, man.
In the randomization and the trial design, you're talking about how the trial design and making sure that you're kind of balancing those things.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So, thank you. You're my anchor. So,
I was already on to the next question.
You're my anchor, you're my kite.
Yes.
I'm not sure I like that analogy, but I'll go with it. All right, fair enough. I'll go with foundation.
Yeah,
thank you.
Better. You're my foundation. We can work on that. Yeah. So really the best way to analyze how a drug works and what side effects would come from it would be if we could take 100 individuals and somehow have those 100 people walk both paths. Does that make sense? Where we can say, well, this person, you are the exact same person living the exact same life, and on this path, this happened, and on this path, that other thing happened. And so that's the difference. But obviously, we can't do that. So the randomization is an effort at trying to make sure that each side is essentially equal. The number of people that got radiation to the brain is the same on both sides. The number of people who are living without any symptoms versus the people who are having some symptoms is essentially the same between the two groups. You'll see every drug, when you see the list, causes diarrhea and constipation and headaches and nausea. Well, that's because people experience these things while taking the drugs, and how can you know that it wasn't the drug causing these things on a trial? I mean, you can't know for sure. So you try and make it similar between both arms. And so the randomization, there's a whole science to how people get assigned to those treatments on that trial. Does that all make sense?
And go ahead.
I just want to interject there because I think this is where one of the things you talked about at the very beginning and placebo comes into play.
Yeah.
Because when people do hear randomization and they hear, I'm going to be on this arm or that arm, in many cases, that's where they think, well, I'm going to be on the one where they just give me a sugar pill and they're going to treat me, and I don't want to join the trial because. And so maybe you could just address that now, because this is that point where it starts to come into the thought process for people.
And are you, just so I understand the question, are you asking about whether or not it's actually a placebo or like trial drug versus standard of care?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people don't realize they get standard of care to compare it against, and they do think that they're comparing the new drug against placebo.
Against nothing.
And I think that's why it's important just to address it here, maybe.
Yeah, that absolutely comes up a lot. So, again, going with that same chemo plus an immunotherapy, those trials have often been done as chemo plus immunotherapy or chemo plus placebo. So even though people are getting a placebo, they are getting that chemotherapy. So I can't think of anything. People should not, and I don't think they exist now within oncology, where the only treatment would be a placebo. That just doesn't exist. Now, that happened when there just weren't treatments. And so it was, we're trying to see if this drug is effective at all, and there are no effective drugs. The amount of studies being done now, and these phase 1 studies, people would not, those are available, so people would not end up on a placebo only. I'll say, that being said, if it's chemotherapy plus a placebo or chemotherapy plus immunotherapy, when somebody has progressed on treatment, it is very important to find out if you got the immunotherapy or the placebo. And sometimes that can take real pushing to find out. But if you didn't get the immunotherapy, then that's important to know, because that might actually be a good treatment option for you. So it can really impact decision making. And that sometimes can take some pushing by your medical team.
Is there ever a time where somebody may be on the chemotherapy placebo that they are switched if they progress to the other arm and then get the IO with the chemo? You're keeping that as the example, or no? They just out of the trial and then they got.
Well, no. So certainly there are trials where people could end up on the best standard of care plus an immunotherapy of some kind, or they end up on best standard of care and there's no placebo involved at all. And part of the draw is if you end up in that arm, when the cancer grows, then you can get the study drug. And sometimes that's part of people being in the study. But I'll also just say, any trial that's open nowadays has to go through a review board, there are a lot of regulatory steps in making sure that, in calling this ethical. Years ago, without any oversight on this, there were frankly some extremely unethical studies that were done decades ago. And so now any study being opened, there are a lot of steps to make sure that people have looked at this from all angles and say, yes, this is something that individuals should see as a benefit, and there is no risk to this.
Great. So I think we have an online question, and Eric has a question too. So,
Me first?
Yeah.
So her question is, some clinical trials involve a 2 to 4 week washout from chemo. So how do you decide if the washout period is more detrimental, giving time for the cancer to progress, than the possible benefits of...
That's a good question.
Well, her husband washed out, and then at the last minute, his kidney counts went up, so he couldn't do it.
Yeah, and it's a difficult situation. So on the medical side, anyone I see, it is 100% about what is going to be best for that individual. On the other side, when I'm writing trials, I'm writing them to really define what this drug does, what the risks are, and really the science of it. So the reason there's a washout is you want to make sure that you're not attributing side effects to the experimental treatment that are really from the prior treatment. And so sometimes you really require a washout to make sure that you're not giving false data about this new drug. Now, that being said, particularly within small cell, which can grow a little bit more quickly, that can be a more difficult thing. If cancer is progressing, then having a washout period can be an issue. And now 2 weeks is not typically a long time, even for small cell lung cancer, but that washout period is something you have to individually assess. And unfortunately, unforeseen things can happen as well, but if you anticipate that to be an issue, then you don't do the trial and you go on to whatever the other treatment option is, and that's something that really the oncologist would be guiding.
Eric?
Yeah, my question is the protocol often that you have to stop taking other drugs? Because it's very common for people with cancer to be sick with a lot of other problems that are requiring them to take other drugs. And do they have to normally stop taking drugs for other health reasons?
So typically have to stop taking cancer-related drugs, not nausea, whatever you can take. Every protocol has very specifically laid out which drugs people cannot be on while also being on the experimental drugs. Now, and that comes from how these drugs are processed within the body. So if there's a drug that's, if the experimental drug is processed by a certain avenue within the liver, then other drugs that are processed by that same avenue may not be allowed or may have to be dose reduced or something like that. So it really ends up being about how they react, how they're processed by the body. In many cases, people just take their regular home medications unadjusted. But that's all very explicitly looked at before starting treatment.
So before we jump into phase 3, how long does it typically take to get from a phase 1 to a phase 2, and then from a phase 2 to a phase 3?
It can vary a lot. I mean, it can vary so dramatically. It's hard to get.
Yeah, I think it's one of the sort of frustrations in the whole clinical trial space, getting from a phase 1 to FDA approval. Like, why sometimes is it taking years and years to get there versus maybe an expedited approval, which we can talk about a little bit in the phase 3 space?
It's a difficult thing because, you want to make sure that the drug is safe, that it's not causing problems. And I think a lot of times the general opinion is like, hey, you treated some people and you saw how it worked. So this looked good. Why not get it out there? And that's part of why I started talking a bit about how we learn anything at all, is by monitoring, and there is no absolute. We can't, we can read a book and get information, but that information comes from doing a trial and seeing what happens. And so if you treat 40 people and you see 20 of them do better, does that mean that the drug is really something that should be widespread used? In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. And, the classic thing the classic medication case that the FDA would describe is thalidomide, which is obviously many years ago, which the US FDA said thalidomide, we don't have enough information about using thalidomide for pregnancy-related nausea, whereas in Europe they said, no, this is working well, and felt like the data was good enough. And it turned out that thalidomide was causing birth defects. And so, the FDA would say, well, see, in doing our due diligence, we did not expose people to all of the problems that they were seeing that came out later, and it just took much longer to piece all of that together. Now, that being said, there are times where maybe I would feel like they're being more careful than they need to be, and that should not always be weighed out. But we weigh that against something that seems like it's really effective and whether or not we're getting something out there quickly. But this can kind of be like two sides of a seesaw. The quicker you do it, the more at risk, and the more you don't know what side effects might come, and the more worried you are about the side effects, then the longer it's taking to get out there. And so some of it is finding that balance, like many of us would do with friends when we were little, trying to balance that seesaw with your feet off the ground, to find that middle ground. And that's a very subjective thing.
Yeah, and I don't mean to necessarily just point a finger at the FDA, because I think accrual and patient participation plays a big role in this as well, right? Where
protocol design.
Protocol design. So there's, I think, a lot of different arms that kind of come into slowing down the wheel, right?
Certainly. And some of it is even just when I mean, it would be great to speed things up. Writing a protocol, from the time that protocol gets agreed upon to when it actually opens can sometimes be, I mean, it's much longer than anybody wants.
Yeah.
And so this is where, some of it is what I was saying earlier, my impression of when I went to Leahy and saying I went to a community hospital that was doing academic work, is that I didn't want to be around all this bureaucracy. And that was the way I perceived it at the time. But then being there and really writing studies that I then needed more infrastructure to run, I was like, oh, well, it's not just bureaucracy, it's infrastructure. So we have a whole bunch of infrastructure for clinical trials, but when it takes longer, we call it bureaucracy. And finding that balance is still an important work to be done.
Yeah.
I mean, it is definitely taking longer than we want, but there's a lot about safety that's in there.
And I think it's important, too, when we're talking about accrual and patient participation. It's one of the reasons I think this topic is so important to have and to make people become aware and to be less fearful of participating in clinical trials, because it's roughly, well, it's less than 4%. Is that where we're at?
Of eligible patients,
Of eligible patients that actually participate in adult cancer trials. When you look at the pediatric space, it's around 97, 98%, right? And you're like, why is that? Well, it's because there's nothing parents wouldn't do for their kids, right? So it's like you look at the 225,000 people diagnosed just in this country alone every year. How are we not able to fill these trials? And quite often, some of them never get filled, and
that's absolutely true.
The drugs get put on a shelf somewhere because we don't know. Go ahead, Don.
I just had one other question or a statement on dosing. Because I'm on the new 189 keynote, and I followed protocol. I dropped the carbo after 4, and I had like a 50% reduction in tumor size after 4 infusions. Now I'm on 11, but my ALT and my creatinine starting to increase. So I've modified the protocol with my oncologist's approval. So now I'm getting the keynote 189 every 4 weeks rather than every 3, and it's enough to protect my liver. So as protocols, even after they come out and FDA approved, possibly might need to be adjusted, especially under dosing.
Yeah.
And it's important enough for me to be able to, I don't want to jeopardize that treatment by blowing out my liver or my kidneys either, if the treatment's working.
Yeah, I certainly don't want
So let's move on to phase 3. What does that look like?
Ron had a question.
Oh, Ron had a question. I'm sorry.
So when you jump into phase 3 and we talk about it, I'd like to hear your opinions about, or help give us feedback and understanding that a phase 3 is important when you look at the context of something like the Clovis 1686 trial and how everyone look at, oh, it's such a great thing, and then
nope.
No.
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are certainly situations of phase 1 that we find the dose and things look promising. Phase 2, and again, looks promising, and then a big phase 3. And this is where I had mentioned earlier that sometimes there's a kind of a phase 2 that's a small phase 3. And phase 2 can really range the most. It can be small, just single arm, get a sense. It can be actually fairly big, randomized 2-arm or more study looking at a comparison. And I think certainly for companies, they benefit the most from getting drugs out and FDA approved as quickly as possible. So they're certainly trying to push that. And we see companies where the drug worked and we say, oh, well, they did this kind of this phase 2 that took a while, and then they go to this big phase 3. They should have just done a bigger study from the beginning. And then we see others where it's the exact opposite, where they do a big study and then things aren't effective, and we say, oh, they should have been more careful and gone slower in the process. And so retrospectively looking back, is how we determine whether they did the right thing or the wrong thing, but it can be hard to know going forward. But we see that. I mean, I don't know what to say about, I think you said ruxolitinib was I mean, you know, that was a drug that
everyone's
at the same time as osimertinib,
Mm-hmm.
they were both moving forward, and ruxolitinib, unfortunately, was a real failure. It certainly worked for some people, though. So back to the question of like moving stuff forward, I mean, there were people that benefited from that drug, but the balance wasn't enough.
I think it's important to note, and maybe this is not in all trials, but definitely some trials, even if they don't move forward for the patients that it is working for, sometimes they're still allowed access to that drug that's working for them, right? Even if the trial fails.
Yeah.
We have a patient who, he's a stage 4 lung cancer patient, like, I don't know where Andre went, Wells, he's like 16 years now.
20.
Yeah, stage 4, was on original ERESA trials.
Wow.
And was, I mean, obviously it's been reapproved or approved, right?
Yeah, it actually
he's been on it
wasn't.
this entire
Exactly.
time. It was not,
Yeah.
right? But then it was.
Yeah.
Recently.
No,
I mean,
recently.
Yeah, but he's been on it. It worked for
He's been
him.
on it since early trial.
Compassionate use, basically, and he
Yeah.
says it was ERISA and Maker's Mark that have
Yes.
kept him going for 20
Yes,
years.
both of those two things.
So, yeah.
That is what he says.
Yeah. So, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah, that is his claim to fame, yeah.
I am not condoning going out and everyone getting bottles of Maker's Mark, although.
Yes. Yeah, right.
exactly.
Or
It's
somebody
not good.
approved it.
But talk a little bit more about the phase 3 and maybe kind of how they do take that final step towards approval.
Yeah, so phase 3s are really where, so the really big studies, the randomized studies, where we're saying this is the experiment, we say experimental therapy, but you know, the experimental arm being the treatment that we're studying compared to best standard of care, best care you would get off a trial, and comparing those. And the bigger studies are really typically a phase 3. Now phase 3, so it can be a registration trial, which is saying that we are planning to use the data from this trial for the purpose of getting FDA approval. And not every phase 3 is that, but the one, and there have been phase 2s that have been that as well, but more typically it's within phase 3s. So the phase 3s are the ones that have really gone through the most testing for the most part. Now, you know, this process, we're describing it in this stepwise manner, and there is kind of that pathway, but it doesn't look the same for every drug. So some drugs have gone phase 1, phase 2 FDA approval. For example, crizotinib, which was already an approved drug, but for ROS1, which is a much more uncommon cancer, with a phase 2 that was enough for it to then be approved. And others have gone through to more than 1,000 people in a phase 3 study, so that can vary individually with each drug.
Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I don't want to take us completely off topic. I just have some questions kind of about language and nomenclature, but we can save that maybe in terms of how we talk about clinical trials and the issue of does it have an impact on accrual. But we can save that maybe
Okay.
for I want to make sure we.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have to, that's actually probably a next best step. We were going to get into, you know, what is a basket or umbrella trial and what does that look like, and we can certainly, you know, do that if we've got like 18 minutes left. So I want to make sure that we're getting to whatever patient or caregiver questions there might be. Michelle, I'm checking back with you. Are you fine? Nobody's got questions. Don has a question.
I just had a quick question. Once you get into phase 3 and it gets close to being FDA approved, you start hearing terminology, you know, like right to try, compassionate use, expanded access, fast track. What's the difference between all those? Or they all mean the same thing, and a lot of them are, or when would one apply where another one wouldn't?
Yeah, so compassionate use is really where a drug is not FDA approved and therefore not prescribable. It may be on study or maybe even completed a study, but the results aren't yet final. So, you know, let's say people are on the treatment for a year. Well, you can't really know what the results are right at that point because people have to be on it for a while. So maybe everyone's even been enrolled on it. We can't enroll anybody more, but we don't yet have results from it. Does that make sense? So where we say, okay, well, this drug has been very promising, though. We do have our prior data on it, so we would like to use this drug in an experimental, this experimental drug as a treatment for this individual, and so that would be a compassionate use. Whether somebody, something gets orphan status, the fast track approval, and FDA full approval, those are FDA really categories for defining the drug and how they're going to look at getting it toward full FDA approval.
Go ahead, Ron.
So before
I see you, Wayne.
if we run out of time, I want to make sure I get these two in. Can the doctor talk about patients on a clinical trial and the trial not covering all patient expenses would be one. And the second one would be covering clinical trials that don't involve drugs. For instance, there's that whole French study where they did weekly monitoring on the patient every week, and they found better outcomes for everybody. So those are the two questions I wanted to catch.
They used iPads, correct? They used iPads.
Or like
people
mobile.
reporting back
It was
and
like
wearables
mobile.
on that one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, they were actually calling weekly into the
Oh, okay.
patient with a 7-question checklist, I think it was.
I remember.
And then they came out with patients were better.
Wow.
And costs were lower, less
Yeah.
scans.
Yeah.
But anyway, those two issues, particularly patients are, I think, very upset, for the most part, that if you're on a trial, why can't you cover my 50-cent parking an hour ticket or something, or help me cover the cost of getting there and covering all the extra scans that my co-insurance won't cover. You know, this whole thing about trial participation, the patients the patients, they're giving up a lot.
So again, the treatment should be the best option. So you shouldn't feel like you're in a position where you're giving up a lot. You're not you should never be in a situation you feel like you're sacrificing yourself for some study. Here is what we think is the best option for you. Now, you know, on a trial, all experimental treatments and such are covered by the trial. They have to be. So,
but there are more scans required when you're on a trial than the standard of care. And those aren't covered by the trial, typically.
So you should not ever get in a situation where you're paying out of pocket for a scan on a trial. Now, many times the scans actually are standard of care scans, the exception being a scan of the abdomen pelvis. Sometimes the insurance will say we're not covering that. And, you know, there's situations where I think they, as far as what's really standard of care, that they're not wrong. But there are also situations where we're treating people by absolute standard of care, and we have to interact with the insurance company about covering it. And, you know, so that can be a back and forth in regular care outside of clinical trials. But as far as the scan, you know, I mean, you shouldn't be paying out of pocket for stuff that you're getting because of the trial that you wouldn't have been getting otherwise. If you have to pay out of pocket for that in a regular clinical setting, then paying out of pocket for that in a trial, fine. But there shouldn't be extra added cost. Now, as far as parking and stuff like that, you know, some trials actually do cover stuff like that, like travel expenses and such. And I'll tell you, this gets into the kind of that fine area, though, sometimes where people will say, well, you should never be putting someone in a situation where you're enticing them to go on the trial. So due to that, actually, I don't think you can enroll prisoners on a trial. Might be a good option for them, but they're seen as a vulnerable population where you can be skewing them. And so there's a lot to, you know, this is what we were talking about earlier as far as the balance of really being protective versus possible benefits. And so sometimes the payment within trials becomes an issue of scrutiny. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't cover parking or something like that, but I think if it's something where you have to come in much more frequently and therefore that gets covered, versus if you're coming in the same amount as you would be normally, then there becomes this question of well, are you enticing the person then?
Unfair inducement, I think, is the language that they'll use. And I agree with you. I think it should, but that's one of the things that they've put in place.
Somebody sued somebody somewhere. Yeah. And they had to, right?
Protocols are getting longer and longer.
Yeah. Wayne?
I write on my nose. I don't want to.
Hi. Is there ever a condition where a patient would opt to come off of a regimen in favor of a trial if the disease is stable?
Often trials will not even allow that. Because if the cancer isn't already growing, then you don't know how effective that drug is being. So if the cancer is not growing and you give a treatment and the cancer doesn't grow, is it not growing because that treatment's effective, or is it not growing because it wouldn't have been growing anyway? So in many cases, the cancer needs to be growing to go onto a treatment. The exception, I guess, being at first diagnosis, you know, there will be trials that people go on at first diagnosis where you're not. Rebecca, did you have
It seems like we didn't have a, we signed up for a trial in Davis, and we decided to stay where we are now because it hasn't grown as rapidly as it had been, and we wanted to see till the next scan, which is coming at the end of the month. And but it feels like it's so scary. I feel like I have to make this decision whether I do this, and I'm not medically equipped to do that. Like, they're saying everyone has their own opinions and thoughts, but it would be nice to like just know where to go, like what to do. I have no clue what to do.
So the question that that people will often ask to get to that, or that I'll sometimes say, and their response tells me that is say, if I was your sister, what would you advise me to do?
Right.
What would you want me to do?
But I get things like, I've said that question before, and I get responses like this. Well, if it was my mother, I wouldn't want her hair to fall out. And I'm thinking, I don't care if my hair falls out. Well, if it was my mother, I wouldn't want her to travel so far. I don't care about traveling as far. I want to live. You know, when I say those kinds of questions, I get those kinds of responses.
Then, I mean, either you shake it up and ask in a different way, or you see someone else.
Yeah, and I think this is important, and I know you guys have been here when we've had conversations about shared decision-making and what that conversation looks like, right? I think it's really important when you're having conversations with your care team that you're talking about what your goals of care are, right? So you need to know, I don't care if I lose my hair, I'm willing to travel X amount of miles. Those are the sort of things you need to come forward.
Biopsies are us, do as many as we can while we can.
Yeah.
And I've said it from the very get-go, and that just didn't happen the way I wanted it to. Yeah. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and anyone who's saying to you, I mean, talking about, well, I wouldn't want my mom traveling so far, that doesn't seem to fit you at all. I mean, I'm sitting across the room from you, and we haven't discussed anything of your situation, but this is not, you're not someone who's 85 and frail. This is like, hey, I am trying to live my life. So if they're talking to you in a way that's not right, you can say, I'm sorry, I don't feel like you're getting where I am, or you come at it from a different angle and you push it until you've gotten an answer that feels like it is where they understand you, or you see someone else.
When you said earlier about having a board decide whether or not you go onto a trial.
Well, they don't decide the individual. They decide whether that trial is considered ethical. So to try and open a trial, you have to bring it to the group in the hospital, or there are different scenarios.
Okay, I was misunderstanding then, because I was thinking that for me to go on this trial, that the board, like my oncology board would get together, the tumor board would get together and make a decision if that's the best way of treatment for me as well.
Well, sometimes the tumor board will discuss a case and say, we think that this is the right treatment, but that's different than the board that allows the trial to exist at all.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a few minutes left. For those of you who have participated in trials, one of my questions is, and this goes back to sort of trial design and protocols and whatnot, how many of you, and Ron, this will go to what you guys experienced with Joan too, went through a clinical trial and were ever contacted about the outcomes of that trial, even though you had moved on to something else? Anybody?
The standard I understand is they never tell you what happened. You read about it in the news release, like, oh, it went really good, or no, it didn't go really well. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way they're set up.
Is that something that would have been important to you as a patient and a participant in the study to know what the outcomes were at some point?
I think so. I mean, I think most people would like to know that whatever they sacrificed for or participated in made a difference somewhere.
I'm just curious because I've gotten a lot of feedback from patients over the years who participated in trials, and they're just like, I don't know, it's like, it was over, I left, I never heard anything else about it. Here I gave up all my time, I paid for parking, I did all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I have no idea what happened.
Something I know that Bonnie has been at the forefront in is actually pushing for companies to get back to people and report back to them how the trial turned out, because it is something that patients have been interested in finding. So as you're writing protocols, if that can be built in to communicate back, I don't know if it can or can't. But the other thing that was interesting is one of the companies began the process of upfront sending a letter to the patients and thanking them for participating and really laying out more information about what they're trying to accomplish and why. And they saw their uptake and satisfaction and their accrual rates go up because of these communications. And I think that's something that's really important. You know, the patient is really, giving a lot. They're giving of themselves. They're trusting this. They want that information. But just to thank you for them being willing to, what in many cases people think is a risk. And doing that, I think, is important.
Especially if it's a phase 1 trial, we're talking about 4 patients.
Yeah.
That's 4 letters, right? Yeah, no,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Really quickly, I know, if it's okay, Danielle, I want to jump in really quickly. I know we have only a few minutes. I know I'm going to pull a Bonnie here in a good way. And I know I want to be respectful of Penn TV and our time limit. But one of the things I've heard over and over again now, and it's come more recently than maybe 3 years ago, is, again, the nomenclature around clinical trial and the language itself. The concept of clinical trial, because of this long history of placebo, or in some communities, the things that had happened in those communities, it's a detriment to people being open to a discussion. The use of the term experimental drug, right? Are there ways that we as a community of lung cancer people, could we rethink that language and really maybe call it a clinical study versus a trial? And I understand it might not make its way through the medical community, and going away from maybe calling it an experimental drug to the prospective drug, or something different that might get people to look at this a little bit differently and be more open to a conversation versus the negative connotations that come around experimental and trial.
And I think this goes hand in hand with what we talk about when it comes to palliative care, calling it supportive care, right? Like separating supportive care from hospice care instead of lumping it all into one just palliative care conversation.
You know, I mean, it is, it's such a complex topic.
It is.
In general, as you know. And as I said, when I see people in clinic, where they're coming from in their perspective around clinical trials, and sometimes I'll start with kind of trying to untie some of what are the common misconceptions out there. And there are people that go, oh, okay, that's great. There's not a placebo. It's and others that go, why are you even saying these things? Because some people come in with these preconceived ideas and some don't at all. And so, I mean, it's great that you're doing stuff like this because I think there are so many misconceptions out there. I still want to make sure everyone leaves here with the understanding that any clinical trial is being done because it's thought to be the best option for that person. Because that is such a common misconception. And that's where, yes, we appreciate people participating in these trials, but we're not expecting you to do this out of giving. This is being done because we think it's your best option. So, changing some of the language and such, I don't know. I'll have to think more about that because I feel like in some ways we change. Well, what happens is we change the language, and then that is what it means, and that becomes the standard. And so then we have to change the language again. And that's part of how things evolve. So maybe some of it is just getting to the heart of some of the misconceptions themselves, which is the basis for this, I know.
And I think one last point before we go into closing and thank yous I want to make, particularly because I know a lot of patients that we work with aren't seen in the academic settings. You're seen more in the community settings where really the clinical trial conversations aren't happening, right, at all. Whether it's mostly because maybe the physician treating doesn't know that there might be a clinical trial out there that is the best option.
So that's a great point. And anytime someone's put in a position where if someone says there are no treatments, you can say, no, then I'm seeking them out, because that's not always done.
Yeah, and it's very true. And I want to point out that, that's when second opinions with key opinion leaders are a must-do if and when you can. Reaching out to organizations like ours and others who have, will help you with clinical trial matching, at least setting you up so that you can have those conversations with the appropriate people. It is so, so, so important that you know that just because somebody's not talking to you about it does not mean that there's not something out there that's available.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I want to just add to that, the point of you saying contact us. We have large referral networks of doctors like Dr. Sands who really are willing to be a sounding board, a second opinion, a referral, to share their knowledge. So you wouldn't maybe have to go to Boston. We have doctors all over the country that we work with that absolutely put patients first, even if it's not directly their patient, and they can just provide that knowledge and feedback. So please, if you ever hear that answer, come to us and we'll find doctors like Jacob who will help you and help your physician learn about those options and what's possible.
Yeah, and before I do up next, I just want to run through, we talked a lot about treatment trials today, but there are other studies. Your treatment's working beautifully for you. It's working great. You don't need to be on a treatment trial. There are other studies out there that are available. There are, and although they might not even relate to you or pertain to you, they may relate or pertain to somebody that you're close to. So prevention trials, screening trials, diagnostic trials, supportive care trials, and others, very, very important to at least, look into. So with that and 17 seconds left, up next, I just want to go through some of our events and what's coming up in November. November 3rd, we have our Spartanburg, South Carolina 5K. So if anybody's watching and was listening earlier to how amazing the 5Ks are and being able to get all together and celebrate a day of hope, that is on November 3rd. Also on November 3rd in Hollywood, Florida, is the Lily's Lights kite flying event.
I can't go because I'm an anchor, apparently.
You are.
Yeah. So
I'm
Jacob
a kite,
said,
so.
You can
just keep,
go.
No, you keep people grounded and present.
Now he feels bad and he's going to have to explain it.
Just
yes, yes.
You can be the foundation.
I think we can go with that.
Apparently I'm flitty. I don't sit down anywhere. I don't even know what's happening. November 4th, our New York City Marathon. So if anybody's in New York and wants to go cheer on the folks out there who are running to benefit and raise funds for lung cancer, please do. November 10th, our Simply the Best gala here in San Francisco. Anyone interested in attending, please see Jennifer over there, the one raising her hand. That's November 10th. It is such a fun event. So a lot of you have been multiple years in a row, but we do open it up to patients to come. We have a lot of donors who are willing to buy tables so that patients can get a seat at that dinner.
And just really quickly, I'm biased because I work for the organization, but prior to this, I've been to galas of all sorts across the spectrum for a variety of reasons. Jen and the team make ours the most fun you can go to for an event like this. So please, if you haven't come, think about coming.
I was in a wheelchair last year, and Dr. Sands actually danced with me in the wheelchair. So it's a really fun event. November 6th, so I kind of messed up my dates here, but we're having our regional living room at University of Chicago with Dr. Jessica Donington, Dr. Yoti Patel, and Dr. Kyle Hogarth, and RN Livia Zito. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And it's all about treating lung cancer today. University of Chicago is doing a big push for Lung Cancer Awareness Month, and decided that they needed to partner with us to add a patient arm to what they're already doing for their clinicians and staff. November 13th is our next San Carlos Living Room, as I discussed early in the meeting with Dr. Larry Heifetz, discussing some disparities in lung cancer care as well as how the communities are sort of working through that by connecting with some of the academic centers in their area. Oh yes, and that's a date change. So that November is not the third Tuesday, because the third Tuesday is the same week as Thanksgiving. So you're welcome. It's the second Tuesday, November 13th. So mark your calendars. Michelle will be reminding all of you. And then November 18th, our Orange County kite flying event, again with the kite. And then November 24th, as Sally said, is Giving Tuesday. No, it's the 27th.
And pizza party here in the office. That's right.
So there's a lot going on in November for Lung Cancer Awareness Month. We aren't the only ones doing things, so make sure to look out for all the good things to come. Huge thank you to the Office Bar and Grill for the food, Peninsula Television for coming out yet again. A big thank you to our patients. You're the reason we do this. You're why we do this. Please feel free to come, well, go to David with any complaints you have about how this might be run or anything that you would like to see done.
I'll make sure it filters down to the right people.
Done better. No, but in all, thank you. Yeah, which is me. But in all seriousness, we do this for you, and I really appreciate any and all feedback about how this could be better, what it is you guys might like to see us do different, because we didn't build this room just to sit and have pasta in. We really built it because we want it to be a place where you not only come to feel comfortable, but you come to learn in a way that is easy to understand. A big, big, big thank you yet again to Dr. Sands. I also, anyone who still has a glass of wine or a glass of water, we'd like to give him a big congratulations because he's getting married at the end of the year, and we're very, very excited for him. So if Janet happens to be watching, or if she's going to watch back later, big congratulations and hugs to her too. And then to our sponsors, whom without we absolutely could not bring this to you each and every month. AbbVie, Amgen, AstraZeneca, Boehringer Ingelheim, Bristol Myers Squibb, Celgene, Genentech, Lilly, Medtronic, Merck, Novartis, Takeda, and the Yahoo Employee Foundation. So thank you to all of them. Again, without their support, we wouldn't be able to bring this to you, to bring the 6 regional ones on the road, or the 3 out of the country that we're apparently doing in 2019. So I'm going to be really, really busy next year.
By the way, we're going to different countries next year with some of our living rooms. We're going to go to Toronto in May or April. We don't know the exact date yet. And in October, we will be at the Latin American Lung Cancer Congress in Mexico to do a living room there as well, all in Spanish. We're going to do it in Canadian up in Toronto as well. So we'll throw in some dem, dare, and D's and some A's, and we'll be all set, you know.
And
it'll
we're
be beautiful.
At potentially Peru as
and
well.
Peru. We're looking at Peru potentially as well. So,
yeah.
I don't have a Peruvian accent.
Thank you, everyone. Sally, dessert. Thank you for bringing dessert. It is up there on the table. I saw Kim bring it in earlier. There's no competition with coffee crunch cakes this month, but maybe next month. Yes. There you go. There you go. There you go. So thank you all.
It'll be our own randomized trial.
There it is. There it is. Thank you all for coming out. Everyone in the room, everyone online. Hope to see you next month. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.